To live the life is to be no cause of grief to anyone, to be kind to all people, and to love them with a pure spirit. Should opposition or injury happen to us, to bear it, to be as kind as ever we can be, and through all to love the people. Should calamity exist in the greatest degree, to rejoice, for these things are the gifts and favors of God. To be silent concerning the faults of others, to pray for them and help them, through kindness to correct their faults. To look always at the good and not at the bad. If a man has 10 good qualities and 1 bad one, to look at the 10 and forget the 1. And if a man has 10 bad qualities and 1 good one, to look at the 10 and forget the 1. To look at the 1 and forget the 10. I'm paraphrasing here. Never to allow ourselves to speak one unkind word about another, even though that other be our enemy. To do all of our deeds in kindness. To cut our hearts from ourselves and from the world. To be humble. To be servants of each other, and to know that we are less than anyone else. To be as one soul in many bodies. For the more we love each other, the nearer we shall be to God. But to know that our love, our unity, our obedience must not be by confession, but by reality. To act with cautiousness and wisdom. To be truthful, to be hospitable, to be reverent. To be a cause of healing for every sick one. A comforter for every sorrowful one, a pleasant water for every thirsty one, a heavenly table for every hungry one, a star to every horizon, a light for every lamp, a herald to everyone who yearns for the kingdom of God.
Aloha pa, dear friends. A very warm welcome to this, a workshop on youth, being and becoming. The topic being and becoming is one that's covered in a lot of conferences and a lot of speeches, and one that has been dealt with very extensively. What we hope to accomplish tonight is to review the theoretical aspects of this concept, and then, with your help, in a frank, loving consultation, develop an integrated model of how this theory can be applied in practice, how it applies to our individual lives. In doing this panel discussion, this workshop, I've asked 2 people whom I have a great deal of respect for to join me. The first speaker is Rocco Rossi. He graduated from McGill University with first-class honors in political science, winning several prizes. He's presently won a fellowship to attend Princeton University, and he's working for his doctorate in politics. His interests lie in North-South relations and the historical and theoretical precedents to world order. And he's currently, as a non-Baha'i, working with Dr. Hossein Danesh in developing an extensive study guide for the upcoming message from the House of Justice to the peoples of the world. Our second speaker is Dr. Sharon Hatcher. She's perhaps one of the youngest doctors you're ever going to meet. She graduated from the University of Ottawa in medicine, and she is now completing a residency in family medicine at McGill University. Her interests are many, as we discussed over dinner, but among them are health and healing, the role of women and youth in the establishment of peace, and she has performed with the Ballet Sheda. My name is Mehrdad Baha'i. I'm your chairperson. I'm currently working at Princeton University for a Bachelor of Science degree in Electrical Engineering, and I'm concentrating also in international affairs. I'm perhaps better known to my friends as Mr. Coffee, because I have a great habit of spilling coffee over computers and notes and other things. So in starting, again, I want to outline what we're going to do. I'm going to ask Sharon and Rocco both to present brief or expanded versions of their speeches on the role of being and becoming, these 2 themes in the spiritual growth of an individual, a youth. And once they've set this framework for discussion, I'm going to talk a little bit about the role that being and becoming play in the growth process of society when we look at society as an individual organism. And following that, we'll open the mics and have a great consultation. So without further ado, here's Rocco Rossi.
Mr. Chairman, friends, youth shares much with Charles Dickens' description of late 18th century Europe. It is the best of times, it is the worst of times. On the one hand, particularly in the affluent north, one has the opportunity, the health, the resources, and the vigor to accomplish many things and to follow many paths in life. On the other hand, with so many paths to choose from, with so many resources, it is very easy to become overwhelmed, to lose one's sense of direction, and to turn to apathy, to drug and alcohol abuse, suicide, crime, or even to turn over completely one's identity to a cult, an ideology, an individual, and a peer group. These are all, to use Erich Fromm's terminology, escapes from freedom, a certain type of freedom that I wish to discuss in this talk and further elaborate on. At the heart of the issue, however, are the notions of being and becoming. What do we mean by these terms? Why are they important? The Greek philosopher Heraclitus argued that all is in flux, that one can never step into the same river twice, which is not to say that one can't step into the same geographic place twice, but that the river is constantly in motion, that the water is never the same, that the stream grows, that the stream progresses, that the stream changes. Similarly, we are all becoming. We are always changing. We are always seeing and experiencing new things which cause growth or decay within our own beings. Becoming can happen in three separate ways. It can be imposed or influenced by others, parents, peer groups, advertising, role models in movies and television shows. It can be inner-directed, or it can be a combination of the two. Typically, it's a combination of the prior two, the question being, to which pole does one want to move? Is it preferable to move into a form of becoming which is more other-directed, more influenced by external forces and pressures, or is it better to be inner-directed? This is something that I wish to elaborate on further and that the workshop will attempt to elaborate. In ancient times, the question of becoming was not a question. And it was, in fact, very simply done through tradition. You became what your father was. You became what your mother was. If your father was a carpenter, you were trained as a carpenter. If your father was a stonemason, you were trained as a stonemason. If your father was a king, you were trained to become part of the ruling class. And typically this entire process was underpinned by some notion of cosmic order, of great chain of being, whereby each person's station in life was justified by a notion that this station was destined by some universal order, be it God or nature. This order was hierarchical. It placed people in positions of power and subordination. It placed kings over lords, lords over vassals, vassals over serfs. And an Eastern counterpart to the system would be the Hindu conception of caste, whereby certain castes are seen to dominate over others, to play particular roles over others. Historically, this notion changed somewhat with Christianity and the emphasis on the individual soul and on one's individual transformation vis-a-vis God. There was no longer that set order, but rather one individual encountering God. Now, very early on in the religion, when Catholicism took over, a new hierarchy was reintroduced. There was a hierarchy first of a mediated salvation through an institution, through the church. No longer was, as in the primitive church, man individually communicating to God, but man's salvation depended on the mediation of the church. Secondly, there was a two-tiered system of being. That being the most holy people, the people following holy vocations like monkhood, the priesthood, becoming a nun, and those who simply carried out ordinary tasks, ordinary people. And these people were somehow seen as less holy than those above. The Protestant Reformation is the key moment in cracking this hierarchical notion. It threw out the notion of a select priesthood, of a mediated salvation. And this is important because in its secularized form, Protestantism and the Protestant Revolution opened up a revolution in thought in the 16th and 17th centuries, which led to the progressive rejection of worldviews in which humans were seen as forming part of some cosmic order. Both the new conceptions of science and the new notion of autonomy of self arose in this period and pointed to a view of humans as beings who discover their purposes not in an external order, but in themselves. Nature became internalized in the modern era. On this view, the free subject becomes someone who follows an internal purpose and who owes no prior allegiance to any external structure that person has not been partly responsible for creating and consenting to its power. This revolution in thought is responsible for helping to bring down hierarchy, for helping to destroy the justifications for slavery, aristocrats, and kings. For kings to protect their positions now, they could no longer appeal to God, they had to appeal to arms and to persecution of people. This in itself is a great achievement, but it has created serious problems of its own. The problems that Fromm speaks of in Escape from Freedom. The freedom that this revolution gave us was freedom from, a negation of the earlier hierarchical order. It provided no freedom to. It provided no spiritual direction, no course for people to follow in life. It simply destroyed an order. It built no order. All that was left to fill this vacuum of the destruction of the prior order was materialism. The autonomous self, to prove its autonomy, to exert its will, had to accumulate. And this accumulation is seen in possessions and in power. Power over others can be used to procure further possession, and it is a possession in and of itself, in that power is evidence of one's own autonomy, of one's own will, through the subordination of others. The subordination of others has occurred in the subordination of the South vis-a-vis the North, of woman vis-a-vis man, of children vis-a-vis adults, and of racial minorities versus racial majorities, and so on. We in the West don't have the right to be happy. Rather, as inscribed in the Declaration of Independence, we have the right to pursue happiness, a happiness that is constantly several feet beyond people's grasp. Anyone who stops keeping up with the Joneses is seen as strange, as weak, as a failure in society, as a failure to exert one's will, one's autonomy. And of course, the communist world is not very different. Ever-increasing quotas must be filled. The country and its citizens are only happier if these quotas are filled and the system exerts its will over the capitalist mode of production, over another exertion of will. Clearly, this has created problems. And clearly, the problems that we're now facing, that we've heard about in the many talks in the conference thus far, are evidence of this. But where is the crux of the problem? The crux of the problem comes in a mistaken notion of being. Because at the heart of becoming is one's definition of being. In the process of discovering what being is, one begins to become. One begins to chart a course, to chart a future based on a true knowledge of what one is and what one is capable of. Human nature has been described in many ways, and there are at least 4 paradigms under which human nature has been discussed. Man has been seen as an animal, as a more complex form, but as an animal nevertheless, with animalistic tendencies of aggressiveness, of territoriality, and of competitiveness. Man has been described as machine, as simply an empty vessel into which an environment can create whatever it wishes. Behavioralists like B.F. Skinner have propounded this definition of what being is. The Church, the Catholic Church, and the various sects within Christianity see man as a special creation separate from animal life, but as a fallen creation, as one incapable of perfection except through the grace of God, and incapable of perfection on earth. And finally, the 4th notion, which is a notion seen both in the Stoic movement of ancient Rome, in the German Romantic period, in the thought of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and finally in the philosophy in the religion of the Baha'i faith, of man as both a spiritual and a material being. Now, what does it mean to be spiritual? The material part everyone has a pretty good handle on. The spiritual part is less clear. There is, of course, revelation. We are told that the spiritual part includes unity of man, includes the imperative to be kind to one's neighbor, to love one's enemy. But how is this, in fact, to be done? Revelation typically is metaphorical, is allegorical. It requires both interpretation and it requires some means of implementation. Thus, we have the injunction brought by the Delphic temple, by Socrates, and by philosophers and religious thinkers from day one in the history of mankind, and that is the injunction to know oneself, to examine one's life. How is this process of examination to take place? In the modern era, as descendants of the mindset of Descartes, we have the rationalist approach to this form of discovery. We are to doubt everything. We are to criticize everything down to some fundamental basis from which to build. Unfortunately, this rationalistic experiment was crushed by the fact that rationality has no end of doubt. It has no end because it does not accept the spirituality of man. It cannot cope with a spiritual aspect of man. And so rationality must be joined with something else. It must be joined with a search that involves the heart as well. Rationality is of 2 forms, as defined by Max Weber. There is formal rationality, and there is substantive rationality. Formal rationality is the rationality we have in the modern age. It is the means by which people figure out means to ends. So rationality involves cost-benefit analysis, involves cost-efficiency analysis. The best way to do something once a goal has been decided upon. Rationality, though, formal rationality, provides no end. Leo Tolstoy said, science is fundamentally useless because science cannot answer the one question which is worth asking, and that is, how are we to live? Science cannot answer that because science merely provides tools to fulfill the goals of men once those goals are accepted. How are we to do this? Through what I've called the search by the heart and the search by the mind. It requires something that Sharon will elaborate on further in the second speech, and that is discipline. Discipline and the practice of virtue. Because, as Abdul Baha says, if one lets the spiritual side be disused, unused, it will decay, and the material side will grow and will continue to take precedence in human nature. So therefore, one must practice virtue. One must impose a discipline. And freedom in this form will no longer be the freedom from, but the freedom to. The freedom to impose a law over oneself, to be an autonomous self by imposing and accepting this, and by following one's life through the acceptance of this law. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rocco. I don't think I have to tell you that he was an excellent public speaker in high school and won many, many awards. Sharon, could you?
This is a very hard act to follow. Okay. I'm going to address specifically, starting from what Rocco has said, the Baha'i concept of being and becoming for the individual, and specifically the individual youth. Starting on the premise of what Rocco has elaborated, that the Baha'i understanding is that man's true nature is that he has a spiritual essence, that his true nature is spiritual. We are told in the Baha'i writings that the purpose of man is to know his own self, to discover and understand his true nature. After all, this is what we're talking about. Becoming. Now, what we also find a lot in the writings is the fact that our purpose is to know and love God. In the short obligatory prayer, we have this same idea. Now, in the Baha'i writings, Baha'u'llah states that knowledge of oneself equates to the knowledge of God. And this is something that I think is very unique in the Baha'i concept, and that we have to try to understand what it means for us individually. I'd like to quote Baha'u'llah. O my servants, could ye apprehend with what wonders of my munificence and bounty I have willed to entrust your souls, ye would of a truth rid yourselves of attachment to all created things, and would gain a true knowledge of your own selves, a knowledge which is the same as the comprehension of mine own being. Ye would find yourselves independent of all else but me, and would perceive with your inner and outer eye, and as manifest as the revelation of my effulgent name, the seas of my loving kindness and bounty moving within you. And elsewhere in the greetings, there are many references to this. Baha'u'llah says, he hath known God who hath known himself. To me, this is the embodiment of the statement that Rocco made earlier. The idea that when looking at the definition of being and becoming, we are talking about a process. that by seeking to arrive and arriving at a true understanding of one's own self, of one's being, we are in the process of becoming, of fulfilling the purpose for which we were created, which is to know and to love our Creator. Let's examine a bit more closely that process. What we have are three elements. We have the seeker, the human being. We have the object of search, which, as we've said, is the understanding of one's true self, which is equated to the knowledge of God. And we also have to look at the methods by which the seeker attains the object of search. If we look at the methods that are found in the writings, as youth, we're all used to hearing, that we have to pray and meditate every day, that we have to develop a Baha'i life, that we have to do these daily spiritual exercises. But if it's said so often in the writings that this is the method, then maybe we should examine more closely what that really means. The first step is the independent search for truth. This contrasts with past history of man, as Rocco has so clearly stated, that man is considered in this age as to have arrived at the stage of maturity, that each human being after the age of 15 has the responsibility for his own spiritual life and for independent investigation of truth. It doesn't mean that we have to rebel against all previous knowledge, against history, but we have to use our capacities, our basic capacities, in the search for truth to attain our object. These basic capacities, as defined in the writings, are that of knowledge, of love, and of will. Now, the process that uses those basic capacities is one where we're asked to arrive at a true understanding of what we are looking at. And too often, the way we are used to, as young people, to learn something, to understand something, is by rote memory, is by putting something into application blindly because we're told to do so. And it's no wonder that youth today are rebelling against that. We have to arrive at a concept, an understanding that means something to us, that not only involves our intellect, but involves our heart, that generates love and all kinds of feelings within us, and that will stimulate us to apply our efforts and our volition. Because, as Baha'u'llah tells us, that it is only through individual effort that we will grow. I want to talk a little bit about prayer and meditation. Not only is it our daily spiritual food, as we are told, but it has an importance in helping us to develop the qualities that we need to attain our object of search, which is to know and to love God. If we take our individual lives, everything that we do in our day, everything that we do, we get up, we get dressed, we go to school, we go to work, we worry about all kinds of things around the house or with our family. All the efforts that we make at learning new things in general are directed towards things or parts of creation that are in general considered inferior to us. We are at the summit, the head of all our daily activities. We control them, we dominate them. if we focus on the physical aspect of our daily activities, this generates qualities, develops qualities in our character that are imbalanced. Qualities of competition, of arrogance, a sense of false superiority, because we're always dissecting, learning things that are beneath us, either in the mineral kingdom, vegetable kingdom, animals, or maybe other human beings who are somewhere down there below us. But with daily prayer and meditation, that is the one instance, that 15 minutes you take in the morning, that 15 minutes you take at night, where you turn your search, your direction, your energy, your activity in another direction entirely. Where you look towards, as a finite being, towards the infinite, as a limited being towards what is unknowable and illimited. And therefore develop other qualities of humility, an understanding of one's dependence on God. Also through this process, and through many others that we should discuss, is the development of a true understanding that we are, each one of us, noble and spiritual beings, created in the image of God, whose creation is perfect. I'd like to talk a little bit about the effect that this true understanding of what our being is has on our relationship to others. I'd just like to read two quotes of Abdu'l-Baha. Turn all your thoughts towards bringing joy to hearts. Beware, beware, lest ye offend any heart. Assist the world of humanity as much as possible. Be the source of consolation to every sad one. Assist every weak one. Be helpful to every indigent one. Care for every sick one. Be the cause of glorification to every lowly one. And shelter those who are overshadowed by fear. In brief, let each one of you be as a lamp shining forth with the light of the virtues of the world of humanity. Be trustworthy, sincere, affectionate, and replete with chastity. Be illumined, be spiritual, be divine, be glorious, be quickened of God, be a Baha'i. Okay. The importance of understanding that every single human being is a noble and spiritual being is that we have an opportunity as Baha'is to develop an approach to dealing with problems, with things that are negative in the world, things that are evil, that we see in others and in situations around us. We have the opportunity to develop an approach which is unique and creative, where we focus on the good and not on the bad, where we see that and understand that evil in itself does not exist, that it is the lack of light in a room full of darkness. I won't read the quote, but Abdu'l-Baha says that to consider someone as your enemy and treat them with kindness is hypocrisy. That's not what we're asked to do. That was maybe what people in the time of Christ were asked to do, but that is not what we are asked to do. We are asked to consider the person who is acting towards us as an enemy, to truly love them as a friend. That is the standard that we're asked to do. To finish, I would like to talk about the importance of Baha'i youth in this process. What I've been describing are some key elements in the creation of a new race of man, which, as Shoghi Effendi says, is a mission of the cause which embraces with equal esteem people of all ages. But he says, it has a special message and mission for the youth of your generation. It is their charter for their future, their hope, their guarantee of better days to come. Why is it so important that youth take to heart this process of becoming what they are truly created to be? Why is it that they must be in the vanguard of this process? First of all, because of their qualities, and I'd like to remind us of the qualities that we are told that youth have. Of independence of spirit, enterprising and adventurous. Youth must act as a fearless lion. In other words, they must dare to take a stand. They must realize that they have the capacity to be pliable, to detach themselves from all things that are in the world around them at this time, from outdated concepts and traditions, and to truly start becoming now the elements of a new world order. This is truly the desire of Shoghi Effendi, and I will end with this quote. No greater demonstration can be given to the peoples of both continents of the youthful vitality and the vibrant power animating the life and the institutions of the nascent faith of Baha'u'llah than an intelligent, persistent, and effective participation of the Baha'i youth, of every race, nationality, and class, in both the teaching and administrative spheres of Baha'i activity. Through such a participation, the critics and enemies of the faith, watching with varying degrees of skepticism and resentment the evolutionary processes of the cause of God and its institutions, can best be convinced of the indubitable truth that such a cause is intensely alive, is sound to its very core, and its destinies in safekeeping.
Thank you very much, Sharon. As you can all see, both Sharon and Rocco greatly surpassed me in height, but I hope that my comments won't fall too short of the standard that they've set here today. Social change and peace have been the subjects of many theses and dissertations, the goal of many conferences, summits, and convocations, the vision of many poets, artists, and musicians, the dream of many philosophers, scientists, and political leaders, and the unfulfilled hope of the world's people. Rocco and Sharon have discussed the process of spiritual growth in youth. What I would like to talk about very briefly tonight is I want to examine this process of being and becoming, as part of the movement towards peace. Now, there have been two popular views, two major camps on how to create social change. One has been concentrating on the transformation of the individual, and the other has concentrated on the transformation of social structures. Let's examine these two groups in a little bit more depth. Firstly, individual transformations. Now, this is where you hear a lot of talk about. We had Dr. Vitacci this morning, Jack Matthews, and mainly a lot of the Christian clergy. They talk about the transformation of the individual as being a prerequisite to peace. We must transform the individual before we can transform society. And this is based on Christ's claim in a lot of cases that the kingdom is within us. So this is really a process of spiritualization of the individual. And I'd like to read a quotation to you from Reverend Tim Foley, who's a Toronto minister. And this typifies this point of view about societal change. He says that we cannot transform the world around until we ourselves are changed, converted. What is needed is a revolution, a people revolution. Not another political ideology, but a radical break from present secular values to discover our true identity as God hath made us. What he's talking about is what Dr. Danesh calls a change of mindset. Now, the second group is mainly concentrating their efforts on the changing of the structure of society. And I guess the most prominent group in this camp are the Marxists and Communists. In 1848, Marx and Engels penned the Communist Manifesto, and in it they wrote, the history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles. What they noted was that real change must be structural, and it has to be brought about intentionally. What they were observing was that the working classes were being governed by the other governing classes, and that they saw religion as the means of concealing, justifying, and implementing that oppression of the working classes. So they cried out to the workers to destroy the existing social structure in favor of a dictatorship of the proletariat. Now, both of these theories, both of these groups have had a lot of success, and they've both proven to be valuable. We can see in part of the first group, the entire monastic movement. They succeeded in the transformation of the individual and created very peaceful societies, which we have called monasteries. And as far as the second group is concerned, we can see that the Russian and Chinese revolutions succeeded in eradicating poverty, increasing the levels of health, and the levels of education. Now, the problem has been that many people in society have looked at these two theories, at these two groups, and seen them to be seem to be mutually exclusive. That one cannot have both the transformation of the individual and the transformation of society's structures. And as Baha'is, we must go beyond this blind allegiance to one theory or another. What we want to do is integrate these two theories into a holistic approach for social change. And Baha'u'llah writes in the Kitab-i-Iran, "Is not the object of every revelation to effect a transformation in the whole character of mankind, a transformation that shall manifest itself both outwardly and inwardly, that shall affect both its inner life and external conditions." So, not only are both of these processes, i.e. the individual transformation and the transformation of society, needed to achieve social change and peace, but what we want to note tonight is that these two processes are remarkably similar. In fact, Udo Schaefer, one of my favorite Baha'i authors, has called these two processes a historical dialectic. And what he means by dialectic is that these two processes form a tandem. They reinforce each other. As individuals transform, as they become more spiritual, it becomes far more easy to change social structures. And as society changes, then it becomes much more easy to become a good person, a better individual. So very briefly, let's consider the parallel nature of these two processes. Now, Rocco and Sharon both talked about the individual transformation, but I want to just recap very briefly so that I can set the analogy up. The period of youth is a period of confusion, but also a period of flexibility. It's the time when we examine our values and form them. It's when we orient ourselves and choose our goals. So the two aspects of being and becoming are this. The being part, we undergo an independent search to discover our purpose. In the Baha'i sense, it would be to discover that we are a noble being, the fourth paradigm that Rocco talked about. This also involves the selection of a model. Now, this is very, very crucial, because in deciding what you are, you also want to decide what you want to become. And what you do is you select something that you want to grow towards. And in the Baha'i sense, as a noble being, what we want to grow towards is the model, the perfect model, the perfect precedent that Abdu'l-Baha gave us. We want to grow in his direction, be as he is. So therefore, the becoming process is evolving towards what we have defined in the first part. And how does this becoming process go about? It's through a process that we call sacrifice. Now, Abdu'l-Baha means a completely different thing by sacrifice than we have come to know. We usually think of it as, giving up something. I'm sacrificing my night of television in order to go to a fireside or something like that. It's almost a loss. It's a bad thing. Abdu'l-Baha has looked at sacrifice as a glorious thing, as an improvement in station. And the example he uses is that of a seed. As a seed becomes a tree, what it has really done is that it has sacrificed itself to this bigger structure. And that's indeed what individuals are going to do. As we forget our animalistic passions and move towards the nobility that human nature really is, what we're doing is sacrificing the animal form. But in reality, it's not really a sacrifice at all. It's an improvement. So that is to say that this individual transformation has its parallel at the social level, at society level. And Abdu'l-Baha writes that there are periods and stages in the collective life of humanity. At one time, it was passing through its stage of childhood. At another, the period of youth. But now it has entered its long-predicted phase of maturity, the evidences of which are everywhere apparent. And then the Master continues that the gifts and blessings of the period of youth, although timely and sufficient during the adolescence of mankind, are now incapable of meeting the requirements of its maturity, i.e. the structures in society have to change. So let's examine being and becoming at the societal level. First, we have to examine what we feel the nature of society is. Okay? It is not warring camps. It's not the North versus the South. It's not the U.S. camp versus the Soviet Union. What we apply at this point is what the Guardian calls the pivotal principle, the oneness of mankind. We come to realize that society, that global society, is one, that we're all part of this one society. And the model of growth that we have, just like Abdu'l-Baha for the individual, is the most great peace. What Baha'u'llah, Abdu'l-Baha, and the beloved Guardian described as the most great peace. That is what we want society to move towards. And that is what we want to identify as our goal. And how does this go about? It's again through a process of sacrifice. But sacrifice in the new sense. What we're talking about is getting rid of the old order. Sacrificing the old order for Baha'u'llah's new world order. So then, real social change involves transforming the individuals and transforming society. Now, just to look at this, let me do something that is very rarely done. I mean, a lot of people look, this analogy has become very common. We look at the society as an individual, and we always tend to look at the individual first and society second. What I want to do tonight is go in the other order. Look at society and use the things that Baha'u'llah has talked about at the societal level in talking about the individual. And we all know about the process of the lesser peace and the most great peace at the societal level. Mankind will come to realize its oneness. And this will result in the political unification of mankind, what we have called the lesser peace. And then the spiritualization of that unification is what we have called the most great peace. In the case of the individual, it's the realization of one's purpose in life, the formation of identity and value. And this is the being, what we call the lesser peace for the individual case. And then spiritual growth from that point on, and this is the part that we're mostly struggling with, is growing, trying to reach that perfection. And then reaching it, which is something we may not do in this life, is the becoming part, the most great peace. So, because these two processes are very similar, the problems that they encounter are very similar too. I think if we're going to identify one of the key problems in the period of adolescence, it's that of competition and competitiveness. We often hear children saying, hey, my dad's car is bigger than your dad's car. And this is the same mentality that we see in society today. We have people that form groups that compete with each other. We have NATO and we have the Soviet bloc. We have the countries that produce oil. They form a group called OPEC. We have the countries that have nothing, want everything, or want something. As Dr. Vitachi would probably say, they call themselves the South, the Third World. But the difference is not in their position. The similarity is that they all see mankind as divided, and they're trying to compete with each other for what they call limited resources. So as individuals and societies alike grow up, what they have to shed are these characteristics of adolescence. Abdu'l-Baha has told us that renewal is the order of the day. And we've talked about how to overcome these obstacles. But Sharon talked about prayer and meditation. I want to end by reading a quotation from the Guardian. And I want this to set the mood for the consultation this evening. Ours is the duty to ponder these things in our heart, to strive to widen our vision, and to deepen our comprehension of this cause, to arise resolutely and unreservedly to play our part, however small, in this greatest drama of the world's spiritual history. Okay, now I'm going to switch roles and become the moderator. We've given a basic framework for the discussion. Now that we understand what the being and becoming processes are, both at the individual level and at the societal level, what we want to do is apply it to practice. I mean, theory is great, but when it comes right down to it, we like to watch Dynasty on Wednesday nights. We like to watch the Super Bowl, which are not bad things in themselves, but it's the value we attach to them. Okay? And in order to discuss these very frankly and to have a productive consultation, we ask your help. We want you to share with us your experiences, the problems you've had, which is, there's nothing wrong with having problems. We learn, as Dr. Vitachi said, everyone has problems the first time. So let's discuss the problems that we have in overcoming this inertia that society presents to us. And parents can also participate. Don't feel restricted. Yes, please use that mic. There are no questions then about anything we've talked about tonight? Because if not, I have a lot of questions that I would like to ask Rocco and Sharon, because I have a great deal of problems with this sort of thing. No? Okay. Oh, please, come to that microphone.
Ms. Hatcher, you mentioned in your speech that we should love our enemies. I was wondering if you could suggest some points of how one could truly feel love for their enemies. You might love your enemies. You might think about it and say, okay, I won't hurt my enemy because I know it's not a good thing to do. But how would you create that real, true feeling in your heart? That's what I'd like to know.
I don't have the answer. Okay. I'm really glad you brought that up because in the recent talks I mentioned this, and it always people ask, well, this is what I'm really struggling with when it really comes down to my relationships with others, as trying to follow the example of the Master. And I think really there's several points to look at. And I can only speak from my personal experience. One is to look at Abdu'l-Baha, at the way he was with people. It's such a delicate balance where he sees the reality of the individual. It's not closing your eyes to what they do, to how they are towards you. We're not asked to become idiots, naive, where we let people exploit us to take advantage of us. There are very strict guidelines in the writings for dealing with thieves, people who are deceitful, who lie. We don't tolerate this as a society. But the justice is applied at the level of the society, at the level of institutions. We as individuals do not seek revenge. We are asked to be merciful and loving. Again, if we look at Abdu'l-Baha, he had that capacity to look straight into the individual, to see the reality that was there, but to understand that by his attitude, by his behavior toward that individual, which demonstrated his understanding that this person, in essence, was a noble and spiritual being and had the potential to manifest the attributes of God, his relationship with that person was healing, was transforming, and uplifted that person. And we've heard so many stories about how someone would walk in with prejudice and really a mean attitude towards Abdu'l-Baha and always emerge totally transformed, or with the first step of transformation. Now, on a practical level, I don't think we need to feel guilty about the fact that when you first try to do this, it's not sincere. We can't be perfect from the start. And there's going to be an interaction between your inner feelings and your behavior. But as we understand in prayer and in all aspects of Baha'i life, the two build on each other. Once you start to do something, even though you may not feel it, it creates the feeling. And the more you have that feeling that is sincere, then the better you are able to act that way. And it sort of builds. Maybe the only other thing I can give as an example from my life as a Baha'i child, I guess, is that you learn that really this is the only way, on a practical level, that you can, the less harmful way for others and for you to get through life. I had the experience as a Baha'i child, and I want to take the time to relate this for some of the younger ones who are here, where I was in a Catholic school, and I was different, and people thought I was weird. We had no TV. I must worship cows, and we're vegetarian, and I don't know what else. And I became the source of mockery for the gang. People laughing and putting you down. And I'd come home crying, and I wouldn't know what to do. Now, a lot of advice would be, well, strike back. Or, what do you do? Now, your response in a situation is crucial because the response of the individual translates into the response of a nation. This is the key. Are you going to strike back? How are you going to respond? And what I developed with my parents was that I was going to ignore what they were doing, and I was going to seek to be friendly towards them. Well, the consequence of it is that several of these friends those people are Baha'is now today. Not through various processes, but it really taught me a lesson because it was just child's play. It turned around 10 years later.
That was a good question, but just to try to get more questions from this audience, what I'm going to do is probably unprecedented in Baha'i history, but I'm going to offer you this golden, delicious BC apple for the best question asked by an audience member. So please, or you first. Please to them. Go to them. If it's not a question, it doesn't qualify for the apple.
I think about that, how to love our enemies, or somebody that we see with so many faults as far as human barriers are going on, personalities. Abdul-Baha mentions and uses the analogy, the example of the rose. Have you heard that? I don't know who heard. He's saying that just imagine that somebody that you love or loves you give you a rose, very nice and beautiful rose that has thorn and everything on it. And he says that when you get that rose or you receive that rose from even far, in mail or anything, you just cherish that rose and love that rose, and you really have it dear to you. And he says that what you love is the love of that beloved that you love. It's not the rose that you love, but it's the symbol of that your beloved that you have with you and cherish it. And he says that consider every person that you get that gift of God, and you love that person for the love of God, and then you can transform that love to love of the rose.
I'd like to offer a simple solution that works for me when I have enemies or anger or resentment towards people. If I can identify that person, place, or thing, then I can begin to treat that person, place, or thing with the same love that I would give myself. And so I pray for that person. Or, like someone said, at first it's not real sincere. It's like, but after a while, it begins to change my thinking, and I usually figure out either that where I can take responsibility where I've been at fault and I can make amends, or the feeling just goes away if there is no real problem. A lot of the problems exist between my ears, and so they're not really real. Some of them are, and when they are, I have to take responsibility for those and try and make amends or identify where I'm at fault, and try not to blame the other person. Because that's, when I have an enemy, I'm usually blaming someone for something that they're doing to me, and I have a fear that I'm going to lose something, or that they're going to take something away from me, or they threaten my self-esteem or my security or my relationships. And so by praying for these people or places or things, I've resented towns and schools and all kinds of institutions and authority figures and things, and I found that I did have to pray for them, try and take some responsibility, and then make amends if I could.
Thank you.
This is half question, half comment. Do I still qualify for the apple?
We'll see after.
All right. I just want to change the topic of discussion from micro-spirituality to macro-spirituality, and referring specifically to your talk about the dialectic, the process of the dialectic. Now, I think in the first half of the 1980s, we've seen what people call the rise of yuppieism, which is basically the utilization of your education in the pursuit of materialistic ends, which are basically elusive. Now, I wanted to know, we as Baha'is should strive to stay away from yuppieism, in particular when it comes to the process of the dialectic, because if we are to change society, we have to be able to utilize our education in a spiritual manner. Now, I think maybe you should elaborate a little on what I've said as to how we as individuals can utilize our education towards the establishment of that new world order and towards contributing to the process of the dialectic. Okay.
I think that qualifies. I think you've hit a problem that's very close to home with me, because I've been bordering the line between yuppieism and Baha'ism. Okay, I love Giorgio Armani. I just love him. Okay, I like polo. I like BMWs. I like these things, and it's a difficult thing for me to try to, to detach myself from these things that yuppies value so dearly. But let me share with you what I heard someone else describe yuppies with a different name, and that name is AA squared, AAAA, and it stands for Adults Acting as Adolescents. And the basic problem of yuppieism, and I guess the first step to solving a problem is to recognize what the problem is. The basic problem of yuppieism is that there's never a confrontation of the being and becoming as part of the whole. The Baha'i looks at the individual as a part of the whole, as a part of mankind, and how that individual can function within the global society. The yuppie philosophy centers on how an individual can amass as much power, money, and comfort as possible. He is independent of society. As such, his aspirations are somewhat empty. And that's why we're now beginning to see a great deal of yuppie suicides. I believe CKFM in Toronto had a special on that. But, and we're beginning to see yuppies discovering the emptiness of it. So what I'm doing personally to overcome this problem, having realized what the problem is not burning up my Giorgio Armani suit, but I've decided to go travel teaching for 10 days in an Indian reservation in northern British Columbia, hoping that I can try to rediscover some spiritual values in myself. I have some time to think about what is important in life and really exercise the most important part of this process of being and becoming, and that part being the will to act. I know what is good for me. I know what the medicine is. It's a matter of taking it. So I think that's how I would answer it. I have one question I want to ask. Oh, is there? The other question has disappeared? It was you. Huh? You sure? Okay. I think one of the common problems we have is in choosing education as youth. We're trying to decide what to study, and how what we in fact end up studying will shape the way that we can serve humanity, will shape what we do in our lives. And it's a topic that a lot of youth battle with. And I know, since Rocco and I both attend the same school, that it was something he had to come to grips with this year. And I want to ask him to share his experience for the benefit of the rest of the audience.
You know he's just doing this to try to win the apple, but the problem with choosing education and choosing a career and type of educational formation is that one wants to be useful, one wants to have impact on world problems and help in the transformation both of oneself and society. And the problem is, do you want to do it directly? Do you want to do it indirectly? Do you want to do it now, or do you want to do it tomorrow? Education requires, to some extent, a putting off of being immediately helpful. I mean, you could immediately ship yourself off to India and start digging ditches to help in flooded areas, or help build dikes, or any number of things. You could do it now, and you could have a limited impact. And for many people, myself included, after several years of school, you begin to wonder, well, when am I going to have an impact? Moreover, there's a separation of, say, a more skilled type of training with a more academic training. It's very difficult, at least I found it very difficult to justify to myself after several years of education that I'm in a very academic pursuit that does not have an immediate impact on people's lives. Mine is the world of ideas. It's the world of trying to help people come to new understandings, of moving from position A to B. But mine is not the role of the building the bridges now, building the dams now, digging the ditches now. And that's something that each of us has to face. And ultimately, I think the answer has to be found in, one, each of us has certain gifts that we've been given, certain talents. And if one is more scientifically, technically minded, then one should try to discover that in this process, in this questioning of oneself. One shouldn't do what is expedient, what is there to make the most money, to gain the most respect in society, but one has to find that which one is suited for, and then really apply it with a passion. The minute that you have questions and it begins to dawn on you that you cannot do something with passion is the moment you have to get out. And it may be for 10 days to northern British Columbia to think in a different environment. It may be joining Crossroads International and going to India for an 8-month period to question and ponder, or it may be switching over from arts and sciences into applied sciences, but it's something that is part and parcel of the being and becoming question, that once one has a greater sense of what one's being is and what one's talents are above the more general qualities of human nature, the more specific talents and skills that one has, one seeks to put those into action.
I believe you had a question.
I'm not competing for the apple, okay? I want to make a comment, and then one of the things I find in most Baha'i gatherings is that we don't like to talk at the micro level. We'll do everything to avoid it. And so our conversation becomes trivial, okay? Because the questions we ask tend to be very academic, and they're not profound because they don't touch anything. They touch on all the safe stuff that nobody gives a damn about anyway. So that's a problem, friends. My question is this. How, as a youth, and even as an adult, I've struggled, particularly as a youth growing adolescent, coming in from a Brooklyn environment into a Baha'i community. One, my sexuality. Two, my concern about meaninglessness in my own life and in the life around. And trying to bring or extract from the writings of Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha a sense of meaning, purpose, direction. Because I've often found that those things were being competed with or interfered with by notions of, if I had in my day a Mustang instead of BMW, or 1967, 67 Porsche, yeah. Then you would be the finest thing on the block, and all the ladies would come flocking after you. You see. Or if you had the greatest threads in the world, then similarly you would get jobs, you would get become whatever it was the equivalent then of being a yuppie in this day. If you had a certain level of education, one saw oneself as being something, a person of consequence. Okay. Is there a problem with that? Is there a problem implicit in the notion of wanting to make or have an impact on society? And I ask this in this context. If my life as a person on this planet is to be of service to God, to Baha'u'llah, and to my fellow human beings, then does it matter if I don't have an impact, or if I don't believe that I'm having an impact, or if the world at large does not see that I'm having an impact? If that's true, then where do I get meaning from? Where do I derive, or how can I derive a sense of purpose in my own life?
I feel that, Reggie, that you're bringing up a few things that already just the kind of situation that we're here makes it difficult to discuss, because it's, let me just say my very personal feelings, the way we're here towards there, it's not a situation that leads to a lot of personal expression. And I also see, again, I can only speak from a personal perspective, in that when I was growing up, I'm still growing up, but just a little while earlier, a few years ago, as Baha'i junior youth, the issue that seemed to be bothering a lot of people in the Baha'i community with respect to the youth was one of rebellion. The first generation Baha'is rebelling, not signing their card, that was a statement, and all these kind of things. And what I see now with a lot of the junior youth is apathy, is a sense of helplessness, like you're talking about. And the last thing that I would want is to feel that the kind of presentation that we've made today is crushing to people who feel, my God, I'm not going to grow up to be some big academic who's going to have a huge impact on the world, so therefore I'm not part of what we're talking about. And it's been a struggle for me to try to deal with this question in my own Baha'i community, of the sense that as an individual, junior youth, whatever, 14 years of age, I'm not much, I can't be perfect like my parents. There's no way I can really be a Baha'i because I'm already blown it. I've already done this and this and this. And anyways, that sort of feeling, with the fact that we're trying to talk together as youth about the standard. How can we talk about the standard in a way that doesn't crush us, that doesn't make us feel so devastated because we're so far from the standard? I think what we try to do is present some of the standard. Again, from a personal perspective, how I resolve that somewhat in my own life, and I think what I try to develop with the junior youth in my community is working with what at that time in our life, at that whatever developmental stage we're at, is important to us. And for me, that was it was other friends. I think what's important at that stage in your life is feeling really loved and appreciated by the gang, by the other friends, and feeling that you are attractive. And that brings in the whole aspect of sexuality as well, and how your own sexual identity and your own total identity. Am I neat? Am I attractive? And can I be attracted to others? And that we have to discuss and we have to develop in the Baha'i context. That is a task. That's part of being and becoming. And we have to feel much more free to explore what that means within the Baha'i framework. And I asked my dad that once. I said, what is there to encourage you to really try to do all the things? Being a Baha'i seems so difficult. What is it that is there to encourage you? Because it's painful, it's difficult, the world's falling apart, the peace is going to come anyways, And the only thing that I really came up with that was meaningful was my Baha'i community, was the fact that I love my Baha'i community. I love those friends that I have that connection with, and they love me, and we really care for each other. If that's not there, if I don't feel that, then I'm not going to have meaning in my life.
We did start late, so maybe I'll take one more question, and then we'll end. We'll just announce the winner of the apple. So.
I'd like to add a little bit to what Reggie discussed, meaning, purpose to life. In a more general sense, and also specifically, I'd like to ask a question which will revolve around education. I remember after writing my exams for my BSc in computer science, going home on the bus, and I thought to myself, as the conductor came by, I thought, something, I can rattle off a whole lot of jargon, ROM, RAM, this and that, and be very impressive to this guy here. And he'll be cognizant of the fact, here comes a guy who is an academic, who seems to be knowledgeable in the esoteric world of computers and science and so on. And then I found it amusing to reflect like that, because if I looked at it objectively, I would say, fine, but it didn't mean a damn thing. I mean, at that point, it was amusing, but then going on from there, going further in one's career, I went for my master's, and I worked in the field of computer systems, and I found that specialized me career-wise in a very, very narrow area. And if I moved out of it, moved into hardware, if I moved into a different area of specialization, even within the field, I would be really in hot water. Now, as far as the career is concerned, I see the merits of the fact that you could specialize, but there's no doubt of the fact that specialization is getting in some cases even to an absurd degrees. For example, I've seen people write doctorates on the implications of growing apples what's the difference of the color and sheen of one particular apple and where it originates from and so on. and you could spend years and specialize in all sorts of areas, but due to the growth of knowledge, it's inevitable that whatever you learn is going to help you in a more and more of narrow area. It may help you career-wise, but there's no doubt of the fact that this would be at the expense of having a broader base that you can draw from in order to see purpose in life with respect to your relationship with society, with religion in a broader sense, with your relationship with what's going on around you in literature and so on. And I mention this because in the Baha'i world, education does play a very important part. And the question I ask is that in a world like that, how can you arrive at a balance and say, okay, this is where I'm at, I see the reality, and this is as far as this is where I see myself, and this is as far as I'm going to go. I see this as particularly relevant when you come across vast changes that have occurred in society. For example, I read an article by Arthur C. Clarke where he said that he did something and that he cannot see anybody doing right now, in the sense that a few years ago, about 20 years ago or so, he and his cronies practically knew everything that was written in science fiction. And now, if you even try and read a small section of it, it'll be impossible. For example, those people who took part in doing selections, say, for the Hugo Awards and so on, it would be very surprising indeed if the whole panel, if any member of the panel read everything that was available for the selection process. So, basically, the question I'm asking here is that when you have information growth going at an unparalleled rate, you have specialization of education going accordingly. You have a very, very narrow base as far as having a common base to communicate with your fellow beings. What realistic perspective can you put towards education? A meaningful sense of perspective as far as your place in society and within the Baha'i faith is concerned. There's another thing I'd like to mention here, and that is that in the field of office automation and so on, there's been a great ado about the fact that pretty soon you'd be able to have 200, 300 channels because of broadband television. Now, people say that this is of great benefit to mankind, but the question I ask there is that if that is going to be the case, then every Tom, Dick, and Harry would be watching something completely different. And if I meet somebody and I say, at the moment, there is a possibility that I can say, "Did you watch this?" And they'll say, "Oh yes, I watched that," and you can commute on that. But I don't think that's going to be the case anymore.
Thank you. Unfortunately, they have performances that are scheduled, and we have to bring our discussion to a close. I'm really sorry that we can't, answer it. I mean, you raised so many good points that it would take a long time to answer them, and we can't continue with that. But what I do want to say is that I think we have achieved a certain degree of success in this workshop in that we've started a discussion, a discourse on the problems that individuals face in growing. And it's something that we hope will continue to go on and that you will help each other with, and something that we can struggle and do well with. I want to end this workshop by reading a very brief quotation from the Gleanings. And before I do that, I want to thank all of you for participating, all your good questions, and thank Sharon and Rocco for coming and giving their time. Whoso ariseth in this day to aid our cause, and summoneth to his assistance the hosts of a praiseworthy character and upright conduct, the influence flowing from such an action will most certainly be diffused throughout the whole world. So we are important, and we have to try. Thank you.